The reading is one of Mary Oliver's poems, and it's called "Green, Green is My Sister's House." "Don't you dare climb that tree, or even try," they said, "or you'll be sent away to the hospital of the very foolish, if not the other one." And I suppose, considering my age, it was fair advice. But the tree is a sister to me. She lives alone in a green cottage high in the air. And I knew what would happen. She'd clap her green hands and she'd shake her green hair and she would welcome me. Truly, I try to be good. But sometimes a person just has to break out and act like the wild, springy thing that one used to be. It's impossible not to remember wild and not want it back. So if someday you cannot find me, you might look into that tree. Or, of course, it's possible under it. If I was to give this sermon a title, it might be called "Greenly Spirits," which, of course, I have stolen from E.E. Cummings, from that stanza of his poem that begins, "I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees in the blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is infinite, which is natural, which is yes." Greenly spirits is what I want to praise and to encourage this particular morning. To know somehow in our bones what Mary Oliver meant when she said, "It is impossible not to remember wild and not want it back." All too often, the latest scientific discoveries and reports on the impact of global climate change wash over us with dread and foreboding. And we can often be left feeling like any effort we might make to save the planet is just too small, too insignificant, maybe even not worth bothering with at all. So I suppose that this morning I am making an appeal to your greenly spirits rather than to your intellectual apparatus or apparati or whatever we call it, in order to shape and sustain a more hopeful vision for life forms that make up this magical, astounding world that we have somehow woken up to this very morning. The beginnings of thoughts about this sermon came to me, they come to me in strange times and places, and the ones that repeat themselves are the ones that turn into sermons. But this one came last summer on a walk I was taking with a little boy who was not quite 4. That little child and his parents were spending a weekend with me at our family cottage up in Ontario. And it was a rainy, dreary Saturday. I'm sure that most of you have had some experience parallel to that, where you're in some spot and you're confined in ways that you would just not quite imagine being. And suddenly, despite the fact that it was raining, you'd believe it is a brilliant idea to take a walk. And we did. We had run out of all of the inside distractions that were appealing to the boy, and even he was willing to go for a walk in the warm summer rain. And we went down this dirt lane where the cottage is, and under this wonderful canopy of leaves, and I followed his lead in the conversation department, which is always wise with a 4-year-old. And the conversation ranged from Beethoven, that being the dog in the movies, to the likelihood that we could see a bear in the woods, a likelihood which was 0. And on the way back to our cottage, we passed a little garden that marked the driveway to someone else's cottage, and the little guy wanted to stop and take a look. And we did. By this point, we were pretty much soaked to the skin. And so we stood and had a close inspection of daylilies and black-eyed Susans. And then it started to rain even harder. And then my little companion looked up at me and said, almost to console me, "That's okay, David. The rain needs the flowers." The rain needs the flowers. And I resisted my adult temptation to correct him. Whatever for. The rain needs the flowers. For all that any of us know, the rain does need the flowers. And such wisdom may well offer us one more worthy reason to walk gently in the rain upon the earth. In this vast, incomprehensible universe, everything is connected, everything is one. Each part turns out to need the other. Without the flowers, what's the point of rain? A handful of years ago, a friend recommended to me a book that some of you may have read. It was called The Last Child in the Woods. Richard Louv was the author. And it had a really very profound impact on my own sense of my own greenly spirit and where it came from, I guess. The central premise of the book was that children growing up at this point in human history stand in a great risk of contracting what Louv calls nature deficit disorder. They are growing up profoundly disconnected to nature. And not just the majestic, astonishing aspects of it, but also, and maybe even more importantly, the minuscule, the almost missed aspects of it. Things like watching a convoy of ants carting off a crumb. It's quite something. Or seeing a spider dispatch a fly that has come into their web. Or stumbling across a fossil and holding it in your hand and feeling the space that was left behind by something that once lived 1,000,000 years ago. Lots of things have contributed to the rise of nature deficit disorder. The most invasive, pervasive is, of course, all of the attachments that children have now made with electronic devices that compel their attention just about every waking hour. And my parents thought it bad that they had trouble containing how much television we watched. Child's play at this point in time. And then there's the shifting demographic that has 80% of the population living in urban communities these days, So children grow up swimming in pools and viewing nature on IMAX screens in theaters and climbing faux rock cliffs in high-end destination shopping malls. But most striking, at least in my experience, was to learn that in the course of just 2 decades, just 20 years, the radius around the home where children were allowed to roam freely on their own had shrunk to 1/9 of what it had been 20 years ago. 1/9. And of course, we've become accustomed to Amber Alerts and pouring our milk on our cereal from cartons with missing children's photographs on them. So it's not hard to understand why those kind of limitations have become commonplace among us, and to the extent which we don't even particularly recognize what's been lost. But that is not why the statistic is so significant. Just pause for a moment and think about it. Turn the clock back, however many decades is necessary to place you back in your own childhood. And think about what the freedom to roam provided you. What places in your own life did you discover, quote unquote, as if no one had ever seen them before? What was it that engaged your imagination and enlarged it in ways beyond your expectations? Maybe there was a creek that ran somewhere near where you lived that you found crawfish in. Maybe a little patch of woods that you experienced and thought of almost as an enchanted forest. Where was that place where you were free enough to stumble upon wonder? I've been house sitting for friends the last couple of months, and there's a creek that runs behind their house, and my 2 3-year-old grandsons come to visit me on occasion. And this creek sort of meanders its way through. And I think that if I did not insist on it otherwise, we would have spent 3 or 4 hours throwing pebbles into this creek. Or maybe a leaf that they could track as it floated down. They're too young for me to really get out of them what it was they were having experience of. But I could watch them, I could observe, I could remember, not exactly being 3, but that sense of attraction, that sense of connection, that sense of somehow being unified with that experience. I don't think I'm layering too much on little Shay and Merrick's experiences. Because every single time they come to the house to see me, they're like, "Can we go to the creek?" A 100 years ago and more, it was believed that there was something called a nature cure. This part of the country even had many of them. Spas, sulfur springs, claimed to cure everything from tuberculosis to cancer. And I am quite sure that they were not immune, or that they were in oftentimes perhaps places of extensive quackery, shall we say, as people sought the promise of cures that no one necessarily could provide. And yet, as I've thought about this over time, maybe there wasn't a particularly medical cure that came about, but there probably was something about an extended encounter with nature that turned out somehow, in fact, to be salutary. maybe just a panoramic view of a mountain range. Maybe that didn't cure anyone of rheumatism, but it may have provided some inner sense of balance and calm and strength that might have made that illness more bearable. Would we call that a cure? I'm not really sure. Could it help? I'm quite sure. The notion of this nature cure is being borne out in some ways useful in our own time, I think. I'm imagining others among us have either know children or have read about the experience of children with ADHD being more calm and focused after a period of time playing outside. It's been demonstrated that depression and anxiety in children and adults is reduced by even modest amounts of time spent in green spaces, be that a backyard, a garden, a park, or a walk on a tree-lined street. My buddy Annie Lamott wrote, "You can remember everything that is true and beautiful about life on any 10-minute walk." Amazing results have been also demonstrated in wilderness outings for high-risk teens. Can we isolate the factors in nature that have this healing effect on our greenly spirits? No, and I don't think we ever necessarily will. We just somehow know that it works. We know that in the deepest places of our knowing, that place where the greenly spirits are born and where they bloom and where they bear fruit, that this truth exists. Until I was about 10 years old, my family lived in the university neighborhood on the east side of Syracuse. And out of our front door, it was maybe less than 30 yards to the base of a hill, atop which sat 3 low, squat city water towers. And some of you may be familiar with that part of Syracuse. Manley Fieldhouse is sort of at the base, and anyway, sort of Oakwood Cemetery over that way. But anyway, these water towers sit atop this, and we lived just below that hill. And we referred, us kids, to the hill, which probably really wasn't much of a hill, as, quote, the woods. Sort of had this semi-ominous, scary, but we're going to go into the woods motif. Alone or with my friend Nigel, a lot of time was spent there in those woods, looking for bugs and climbing trees and making forts and trying to walk as quietly as we could, as if we were Indians. Tracking big game like chipmunks and moles and squirrels up trees. I would call out to my mother, "I'm going to the woods." And the screen door would slap behind me, and I'd be gone for hours. And it was 1964. A perfectly reasonable playground then. I imagine any child living on that street today would be told by their parents that those woods are off limits. And it's a shame, of course, and not that those woods held any notable flora and fauna, unless you considered sumac and starlings notable species. But it was still, for me, at least in my own life, a workshop of wonder. I felt like I may be kin to the writer Barbara Kingsolver, who wrote this of her own 10-year-old self. She's describing here her quest to learn more about the Cherokee people by reading every word that her school library had on the subject. Long before I discovered Cherokee lore, she writes, I felt in a certain light that animals could talk. I believed in trees, and that heaven had something to do with how dead trees gentle themselves into long, mossy columns of bright-smelling, crumbling earth. Lively inside with sprouting seeds and black beetles. I could not make myself believe in a loud-voiced, bearded God on his throne in the clouds, but I was moved to tears by the compost pile. I think she and I would get along really well. And though I didn't know it at the time, those early childhood encounters, those encounters with wonder, were the first places that I became acquainted with my own greenly spirit. It's where we met. It's where we merged. It's where we learned to speak a common language. And it makes sense that we would have happened at a point in my own development where, of course, it was a natural thing to be receptive to intuition and instinct before others told you those are not as reliable as facts. Fortunately, then, I simply didn't know better. The great 20th century Jewish mystic and teacher Abraham Joshua Heschel taught his students this. He taught that, quote, our goal as human beings should be to live life in radical amazement. Radical amazement. He encouraged his students to take absolutely nothing for granted, to see everything as phenomenal, everything as incredible. He held that to be spiritual was to be forever amazed. And at a similar time in history, the French Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin wrote this parallel reflection. Chardin was a sort of a radical Jesuit French priest, paleontologist, philosopher, theologian. Usually he was on the blacklist at the Vatican for his thoughts. And he said this that parallels what Heschel had said. Chardin said, less and less do I see any difference between research and adoration. Less do I see difference between research and adoration. Imagine what it means, what it could mean to move through life and seeing it through a lens of amazement and or adoration. To take nothing for granted, in effect, to see each thing, each part, each particle as sacred. Even yourself. Radical amazement to me suggests this very unconditional, without exception, without qualification approach to viewing, knowing, and being in the world. Could we allow ourselves that kind of reckless privilege? Might we take and try some measurement of amazement into our own way of being in the world and doing it soon? And if it seems like too much, it need not be radical at first. If you want to start with mild amazement, that'll work. No one's to be pressured into things they can't handle, but the goal being this radical amazement. But we start where we are. Remember the scene from Charlotte's Web when Fern's mother is talking to the town doctor about this amazing phenomenon that has come to their farm? "Oh no," said Dr. Dorian, I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle. But nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. "What is miraculous about a spider's web?" said Fern's mother. "I don't see why you say a web is a miracle. It's just a web." Ever try to spin one? Asked Dr. Dorian. God bless E.B. White. So give yourself the opportunity for some radical amazement today. Let your greenly spirits come out and play. And all you need to do is take a walk. In the woods, if you've got some handy, but it's not required. What is required is that you set off, daring to be amazed. Think wonder, think mystery, think awe. And if there happens to be a spare kid around you close by, take them on the walk with you. Because if you miss that which is amazing, they'll be right there to show you the way. May such blessings be.